Dead twigs snapped beneath muddy boots, and dry leaves rustled against our tired arms as we made our way through the dense undergrowth of the tiger forest. I was determined to find the craft that my father came to this world in. It wasn't easy carrying the weight of my father's legacy on my shoulders, a fortress-like soldier admired by thousands of Prussians. I, however, the second son, only 20, was picked to be the next king of Cordova. Zayta's fight was in my blood, therefore I couldn't kneel at fear, nor could I bear the sight of defeat. As historic as my father's legacy may be, it will always follow my sister and me. It will always be the white full moon above my head, lingering in the dark sky. I sometimes wonder about a different life, a life without guidance or paved paths. That, though, will never happen. In order to conjoin both kingdoms, Serb and Prussian, royal marriages were to be arranged. My older sister, Cheyenne, half Prussian, was married to the Serb prince. I, unfortunately, am to marry the daughter of one of the heads of the elven houses. I dreamt of true love as a boy, finding a soulmate to cherish and protect. I didn't imagine kneeling to a stranger, someone I couldn't give my heart to. It was a path I had no control over, as she was eventually to be my wife. I was hoping with this venture to find my father's craft would take my mind off his illness, and that I'm due to be the next king of Cordova and to be married to the daughter of one of the heads of the elven houses. I can't say that I'm particularly happy about marrying a woman I have not met. I was told her father El was brought to our island as a captive by the Golden Empire.
Medved, this is a bad idea. Mother and father are going to kill us.
Relax, Lilica. They won't find out, I replied.
Well, my clothes are getting dirty and we should be in jail already. Cut the troops is got.
I told you to wear traveling clothes. We'll just tell her we got a little lost and we'll still get there before Medved's wife gets there, so relax. Casper huffed and pushed back a branch with the butt of his rifle.
What's this?
Lilica, stop complaining. We told you to stay in Cordova, and she's not my wife yet. I haven't even met her yet.
Medved is a helmet!
Lilica snapped. I looked back as Casper came rushing back to see. He towered over our baby sister and looked at the rusted helmet she was holding. It was an old Persian guard helmet like the one our mother would have been wearing that day. The day that storytellers from the Three Kingdoms say the goddess sent her knight to save our world. It must be hers. All we have to do is follow the trail of Mom's armor and it'll lead us right to the ship Dad came to this world on, I said, as we began to trek through the tiger forest again. Lilica, leave the armor where we found it, Casper demanded.
Why?
So we can find our way back, I replied.
Like the bedtime story that you used to tell us. The one about the two kids and the breadcrumbs.
Casper just laughed and there was a thump as she dropped the helmet. She followed closely behind us as we continued on. Lilica was even more excited than I was to meet Elle's daughter, Miralise, known as the head of the House of Purple Water. Miralise was the brightest of Elle's 3 daughters. Vlad, the general of the Red Army, had mentioned stories about their family. I didn't intend to pay much attention to royal gossip. I just knew one truth, a guided truth that my mother set forth for me. I knew that sooner or later I was to marry her. Casper slung his rifle over his shoulder and drew his sword. I put my hand on Lilica's shoulder. She mumbled something about not being a child. I looked back at my younger sister. Her head came to my shoulder. I often used her for an armrest just to annoy her. Her midnight black hair came to her waist, and with her large sapphire eyes and purple skin, she looked just like our mother. Casper was tall, muscular, and could fight 100 soldiers with just one arm. His skin was oddly lighter than most Prussians, which made him unique. Women flocked to him for his hazel eyes and slick-back hair. Romance wasn't an issue in Casper's shoes. Of 8 children, I was the only one that shared my father's pale complexion and chestnut brown hair. My scarlet eyes were a mystery, for no one knew where they came from. Some kids teased me for taking after a fox. My eyes, indeed, glowed in the sunlight as if I resembled a wild fox. I pushed the branches out of the way, but accidentally let one go.
Medved, that hit me in the face!
Lilica cried. Well, you should have seen it coming. We were met by the sight of another worldly craft.
That does not look like a ship.
Lilica said. Didn't Dad call it something else, like a pod? I asked as I walked over to the large casket-like object. It was almost big enough to fit 2 people.
Stay away from it, Medved.
Lilica, calm down. I'm just having a look. I looked inside. There was a pan of glass with a battle axe stuck in it. I looked at the floor of the craft. There was a panel pulled up. I saw 2 yellow bricks. One had a lightning bolt.
Medved!
Lilica groaned. Stop being such a baby. Don't touch anything. Casper barked. I knelt down and plugged in the brick with the lightning bolt on it into the other one. The glass exploded and sparks flew as I jumped back. What did I just say? Casper yelled.
Emergency protocol. Signal strength increased to maximum strength.
A voice from inside the pod said. I looked around trying to find where the voice was coming from. What did you do? Casper hissed.
I want to go.
Lilica whined. I plugged these 2 things together, I barked. Let's get the hell out of here. We can't. The sparks will ignite the whole tiger forest, I yelled.
Communication established.
The voice from the pod said when I pulled the bricks apart. The sparks stopped shooting out immediately. Next time someone says don't touch something, don't touch it! Casper snorted as he walked to the pod and looked in. So, this fell from space, he said, and looked up at the sky.
It's surprising that he survived it.
Lilica said as she walked over and looked inside. That's Dad for you, rugged and tough. I looked to the forest around us. There was a metallic clunk and Casper yelled, Lilica, what do you 2 not understand about don't touch anything? She was holding a white box with a green cross on it that said first aid. It's time to go. If we take too long, Koschei might send someone looking for us, Casper said. I looked up at the tree. There were a few branches that had been shaped off long ago. I heard Casper continue on, stomping his way through the forest as he pulled Lilica alongside. It was late in the afternoon when we finally reached the Prussian castle in the capital of Gilezo. Our stomachs were empty and we were in dire need of the water.
We're going to get into so much trouble.
Lilica groaned as we waited in the throne room. A life-size statue of the goddess Hathor stood tall behind the thrones, and on the wall behind it was a large portrait of a Prussian general. Often when I accompanied my parents, they would share memories of this general who bore the same name as I. I had not known much about him, only that he was killed when the Golden Empire tried to seize power of the island, and I was named after him. Casper advised Lilica to stay quiet and let him take care of everything if she wanted to stay out of trouble. The heavy doors opened and Koschei entered wearing a royal black and gold robe with a purple headdress. She looked youthful despite her age.
It's nice to see you children again,
she said as she slowly sat on her throne. Our mother sends her regards and our father says hi, Casper said as we carefully bowed our heads in respect. She laughed.
Your father has a way with words. How are they?
I rose and shifted on my feet. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lilica had tensed and Casper cleared his throat. None of us could bring ourselves to admit our father was at death's doorstep. I peered over to Koschei. I could tell she knew she had made a mistake with her question.
I'm sorry. I will pray Hathor heals him quickly.
She raised a hand over her mouth. Lilica didn't hesitate to ask if she could be excused to change. I was almost certain she didn't want to be a part of the conversation. A guard accompanied her out of the room and Koschei stepped down from her throne. As we walked out of the throne room, she walked next to me.
Your discomfort shows,
she said. I looked at her without an answer. She laughed.
You've always been shy,
I confessed. I would just like to know who I'm being forced to marry.
That is reasonable. I have not met Miralise personally.
As we continued walking, I tried to stay silent. I observed the glass windows, each towering at 8 feet tall. How come you never married? I asked. She looked down at her feet, then out the window.
I was supposed to, but he was killed when the Imperial forces first came to our island.
I stopped and looked at her, concerned that no one has ever mentioned this. She had a lover who had been killed. She turned and looked out the window and was silent for a moment.
Someone should have told you who you were named after.
She sighed.
He was Commander Medved.
The first commander of the NKDG. The NKDG was renamed the Cordovan Guard a few years ago.
He was felled, protecting Casper and Cheyenne.
I knew there was a conflict between Cordova and the Golden Empire, but I never knew it had reached the castle. We sat in the dining hall as the table was being set by a servant. A messenger was waiting to inform the queen that Vlad had arrived in the city.
Are you excited?
Koschei asked me. I am nervous. The door's open.
Lilica, where did you get that dress?
She asked. Lilica had bathed and was wearing a flowing black lace dress with flared pink sleeves. Her hair was down and two braids pulled it away from her face.
It was in the dressing room in the bedchambers I was brought to. Am I not supposed to be wearing it?
The last person I saw wearing that dress was your mother. For a moment I thought I was looking at her.
Lilica was bursting with excitement. She loved being compared to our mother. The door swung open and Vlad entered with a large gray-skinned dark elf with long black hair and a shorter person wearing a dark brown cloak with the hood pulled over their head. My queen, princess, I present to you Miralise, daughter of El, head of the House of the Purple Water and the wife of Medved, Vlad said as Lilica sat next to Casper. Silently, Miralise removed her hood, revealing her light gray skin, long black hair, thin lips, and elegantly pointed ears. She sat across the table with the other elf, instantly shooting daggers at Casper. What did you do to her? I asked in Polish. He just laughed. Vlad noticed Miralise glaring at Casper as if she wanted to kill him while pulling out his chair to sit next to Koschei and just shook his head.
How was your trip?
She asked. It went well, my queen, but I wish to return home to my wife and children, Vlad replied.
I miss Lilica and Katsiana's visits to the capital.
Koschei said. What about these two? Vlad replied as he looked at Casper and me. She shook her head because Casper always caused trouble when we came to the Prussian castle. He toppled over a few statues from climbing on them as a child. Miralise finally stopped glaring at Casper as the food was served.
Fiktela.
Lilica said, trying to greet Miralise in her own language. Miralise was surprised.
Fiktela.
She replied, her voice soft even when she pronounced the harsh vowels of Elvish.
You speak my language. A little, only what Vlad can teach me. But I'm looking forward to learning from my elfin sister.
So does Frankenstein ever talk? Casper asked as he looked at the other elf. A guard handed Koschei a piece of paper and she excused herself. Vlad waited until she left the room before growling, Casper, behave yourself! Before Casper could say anything, we heard Hadrian, the Prince of Prussia, in the lounge just outside the dining hall. Well, dinner is ruined, Casper said with a casual tone as he threw his napkin down. The doors flung open and a tall, thin, light, purple-skinned man entered. Casper, I'm surprised you're still allowed in my castle. Hadrian snorted as he walked to the head of the table. Hadrian and Casper had never been fond of each other. Hadrian, an only child, was spoiled and had a sense of entitlement as a result. He liked to order visitors around for dominance in front of Casper. He had an irrational need to control, mainly when Casper was present. I thought it was your mother's castle. Casper snorted back as Hadrian's gaze fell on Miralise, who was staring straight at me. I began to sweat under her heavy gaze, a pressure I couldn't handle. Vlad grunted as he demanded that they save their bickering for later. Koschei re-entered the dining hall.
I apologize, but some issues just cannot wait. I trust dinner will be uneventful,
She said as she gave Casper and Hadrian a slightly annoyed glance. Casper just raised his glass. To my brother and his new wife. Miralise took her glass with her left hand. I noticed her need to use her left hand more than her right. I looked over to Hadrian, who kept peeking at Miralise, and quickly felt annoyed by it. After dinner, Casper left the castle, and I found myself in the courtyard outside their Prussian pyramid castle.
This is a nice garden.
I heard from behind in a soft voice with a slight accent. Yes, it's a shame that winter is coming soon, I replied. As I turned, Miralise was looking at me strangely.
Did you say winter, as in cold and snow?
Her eyes glowed in the sunlight, and I felt my knees beginning to weaken. She was a stunning picture to witness. Yes, is that a problem? I replied. She walked to a low wall and looked out over the Prussian countryside. The fields had turned drastically from a luscious green to a golden tan as fall was nearly coming to an end.
I hate cold and snow.
She sighed as she turned to me.
What do you look at me like that?
I like your accent, I stuttered. I couldn't find the right words to say. I wanted to impress her, but it's as if she took the words right out of my mouth.
The forests on your island are beautiful.
She sighed as she turned around. It's your island, too. Is something wrong? I asked.
I'm the first of my kind that I know of to marry a non-elf.
I looked away for a moment to gather my thoughts. I knew this discussion would happen, but I didn't know it would happen so soon. I looked at her eyes, and she didn't appear satisfied or fulfilled. I could tell something was wrong, and it was my duty to comfort her. I put a measured arm around her in the attempt to comfort her, and she let out a sigh. You don't think this will work? I asked.
How do you people say?
She closed her eyes and tapped the wall with her hand. I could tell she was still learning our language, and I found her frustration to be amusing.
What is the word? Optimistic. And you?
She said slowly as I stepped next to her. Me too, I sighed. She wanted to know why I was chosen to be the next king. I was, after all, the second son. I opened my mouth to share my position as next king, but I realized from what Casper had mentioned, a later discussion will be more appropriate. Time was essential for becoming an honest husband and wife. I suggested that we talk about it later. I didn't feel confident to answer it quite yet. Well, dinner could have gone better, Casper said as he approached from behind us.
Making friends everywhere, aren't we?
Elise mumbled. What was that? Casper replied as he propped his arm on her shoulder, and she let out a long sigh. I quickly predicted that having Elise and Casper around each other was going to be fun. She annoyingly shook his arm off, and he propped his arm on her shoulder again. Someone should have warned Vasily that Vlad is back, Casper laughed. I can't wait to see what happens. I laughed as she took his arm off again. Where'd you go after dinner? I asked. I had to pick something up for a friend.
You have those.
Elise asked sharply. Yes, I have a few, Casper casually replied.
Shocking. Go bother someone else.
They exchanged more witty comments with one another. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or to be concerned by their friendly nature. To disregard the conversation, I looked out over the countryside. Our father had taken Casper to the southern continent a few times. I was beginning to wonder what Casper did to have Elise this irritated by his presence. I was about to ask, but Elise walked away from the conversation and entered the garden. I was brought to a large bedchamber. It was big enough for 2 king-size beds with more room to spare. After the day of banter, I decided to wash myself. I was sitting in the warm water of the bathing pool when I heard the door in the other room open. Before I could say a word, the door to the bathing room opened.
Oh, please, excuse me. I did not think you were here yet.
Elise said as her cheeks turned pink. I grabbed the towel from the side of the bathing pool to cover myself. She quickly turned around and closed the door behind her. I sat there, confused and baffled. After drying off, I noticed a sleeping bag and a pillow in a corner as I left the bathing room. What's that? Do you have a dog I don't know about? I asked.
No, that's your bed.
She looked at me with a stern face. I looked at her.
Come on. I worked hard on that.
I stared at her for a moment. Slowly she smiled and I caught a glimpse of her sharp fangs.
You speak differently than most of the people from your lands,
she said. I sounded more like my father when I spoke. Most people from my island sounded formal and polite, whereas my father was more blunt and to the point. She elegantly removed her dark green tunic. I looked away.
It's alright. Why would you be the next Cordovan king?
She asked as I turned back. She was wearing a white sleeveless undershirt and dark gray trousers. I found myself becoming more attracted to her. Her beauty could rival that of a goddess. Casper wants to be a great military leader, and our dad doesn't want Cordova to push its borders. I replied as I sat on the bed. Legend says that it's the will of Hathor herself. She sat awfully close to me, and my heart began to pound in my chest.
That sounds like him,
she said, trying not to sound insulting as she took her bag off the floor. She casually took a change of clothes out, and I looked away when she pulled her underclothes off. I sank into the sheets and carefully placed my hands to my side, trying to remain respectful of her space. I truly hope you don't feel too homesick, I said, in hopes to deter my nerves. She smiled and said,
Thank you. This is not my first time away from home, but knowing that I cannot return home is hard to come to terms with.
She stopped at the thought. A moment to breathe was all she could do. I could tell she was trying to mask the pain in her voice. What do you mean? Are you banned from your homelands? She tilted her soft neck back and sighed as the next queen of Cordova. I wanted to be closer to her and comfort her during this struggle, but I wasn't sure where I stood in her eyes. It was a sensitive situation, being that her and I didn't truly know each other quite yet, and our lives were about to change completely. I, without a doubt, wanted to be someone that she could rely on. I knew only time could tell, and there was plenty of that to spend. She slowly took a feather cloak pen out of her bag. I observed it for a minute. It was a black metal feather with a brass calamus running through a black circular brooch. She may have appeared elegant and soft, but her belongings were gothic. It's nice, I said, as she turned it over in her hands.
Thank you. It's a wedding gift from my parents. Unfortunately, they won't be able to attend.
I sat next to her and continued to do my best at comforting her, reassuring her that she could still visit home even as the next queen. It was important that there were no ties or boundaries between us. A unique and complex being like her couldn't bear living in a box. She tightened the strap in her bag.
Can you do something for me?
She looked at me. I wanted to try and change the mood. I couldn't bear to see her this unhappy.
Take a bath. You smell awful.
She bit on her lip, trying to fight back a laugh. I watched as she slowly strolled into the bathing room. Her long black hair touched the lowest part of her back as she swayed her hips from side to side. She turned to look at me. We looked at each other, and there was a quiet clunk as she closed the door. After she bathed, we talked for hours about our similarities and differences. She was very interested in the history of my father, a world that brightened her eyes. At one point, she asked me,
What kind of king do you want to be?
I paused for a brief moment. I don't really know. I never wanted the crown, but I know that I've always wanted to be a better man than my father. I could tell my answer confused her. I continued, I want to avoid war and be in a place of peace. I know I can make a better place for the people of Siranua. With the crown, I want to make a better place for all of us. She thought about my answer and said something that I'll never forget.
If that is truly your answer, then I give myself to you.
Don't you think we should?
I meant in marriage, you dingbat.
She groaned and flopped back on the bed. I sat still and content by her company. She began asking questions about Kachetsa's son and why he hated Casper. I knew we would go on and on about each other's lives, so I didn't hesitate to answer her questions. A few years ago, Hadrian tried to embarrass Casper in front of a small group of Prussian guards, so Casper punched Hadrian so hard he blacked out. This amused her that she laughed so hard I could see a vindictive smile. I changed the subject. Do I really have to sleep on the floor? She laughed even harder at my question.
If you behave yourself, we can share the bed.
I stayed on the bed and asked about her trip. She playfully pulled a pillow over her face.
The boat ride, at times, was nice.
She continued.
Other times, it was beyond boring and unbearable.
I smirked at her honesty. She looked at me and said,
I thought the rocking of the ship would help my insomnia, but I had never slept in a hammock before.
She threw her hands in the air from frustration.
I just could not get into it.
I laughed at the thought of her struggling to get into a hammock and the confused look she must have had on her face. She shot me a glare.
It is not funny, and the seas got raw at night, and the boat rocked a lot.
Did it help you sleep? I asked.
No, I was thrown out of my hammock and onto the floor.
I began to laugh and she shoved me out of the bed. I grabbed her arm and pulled her with me. My back fell on the floor when I caught her body as it lightly weighed on top of my chest. Her face hovered a few inches above mine and we locked eyes. Her golden green eyes softly glowed and I felt her fingers begin to rake through my hair. I proceeded to run my fingers through her hair and softly pulled her face closer to mine. She pulled away as our lips brushed against each other. The room suddenly felt heavy and I couldn't understand her hesitation. She got up from my chest, a hesitation that dampened the room. I sat on the bed with her.
You looked nervous,
she said as she rested her feet in my lap. I looked down and noticed a black bracelet on her ankle. I pulled her trouser leg back. You have a tattoo? I asked upon seeing the tattoo. A black string that wrapped around her ankle, which tied like a bow on her inner ankle with 2 feathers in a knot.
My father never approved of tattoos, but I always wanted to get one. So, I decided to go with my gut instinct and got one without his knowledge.
How'd you hide it? I asked.
I got it where it would be hidden, and I had to go to the Red Army artillery base to have it done. My feet hurt.
She pouted. I looked at her and smirked. Don't think because I'm your husband now that I'll rub your feet whenever you please. We sat for a few hours. Miralise managed to trick me into telling her how I felt about her. She almost managed to get me to speak in depth about it, but I refused to. My lack of vulnerability frustrated her. I tried not to laugh, but I was attracted to her frustration. I asked her, "So, did your father tell you while we were in this arranged marriage?" She motioned her hands at explanations. Watching it was a sight to see.
He said that this marriage is to keep your armies off our lands.
Her hands kept motioning.
Your father thought about signing a non-aggression pact, but the heads of the other dark elven houses do not trust humans, and refused to put their trust in a piece of paper.
Koschei always said that my dad's idea of politics won't always work, I replied.
Yes. I asked my father why bother with the people on this island if he did not want their army in our lands.
She paused for a moment.
He said, your people could be powerful allies against the Golden Empire, and a year ago, I saw that when your father was allowed to send 2 artillery batteries and 3. What are they called?
She asked. I looked at her and said, 3 infantry divisions from the Sereb army. She nodded.
Yes. After a few clashes with the forces from your country, the Golden Empire flooded our forest.
Her chest inhaled a deep breath of air, an indication that our families were either a load of frustration or fascination. I heard that the fighting was fierce, I replied, knowing that even with our advanced weaponry, all the losses the Sereb suffered came to 1,300, almost a whole division.
Yes, high elven archers are some of the best, and bows are silent, unlike guns. And the gnomes' cannons are closer than the Red Army's howitzers,
She said slowly and broke up the name of the cannon. She explained with dramatic gestures that the pounder cannons were a mile away from the battles, and it took too long for homing pigeons to get coordinates to the firing bases. I had a friend that went there.
Did he survive? Did he come back?
She sat up abruptly. I don't know. No one heard anything from him when he left. We don't even know if he made it over there, I replied. She dropped back onto the bed and sighed as she said a silent prayer for him.
I was caught close to a woodland village that was the target of an artillery.
Barrage, I said.
Yes.
She painted a terrifying picture of 2 whole artillery batteries that fired every gun on one village, and she was caught in the outskirts of it all. She stopped abruptly. I'm so sorry.
I used to love rainstorms. Now the sight of storm clouds fills me with dread and angst.
She stopped and looked at me. Anxiety? I said.
Yes.
She replied with a yawn. I looked over at the clock, and it was beyond bedtime. We had spent all night talking, and it felt like minutes. We settled into bed, and she waved a hand, blowing out the candles in the room. She reached over and put her arm around mine. I felt her lips as they touched my cheek.
Good night,
She said. Sleep well, Miralise, I whispered. After breakfast the next morning, I walked outside to meet Casper. He was already waiting atop his horse. Where's Vlad? I asked. With the queen. Where's Miralise? She's inside complaining about how cold it is outside. I grunted as I climbed onto my horse. It was a pleasant October morning, a little cool outside, and the sky was crystal clear with not a cloud to be seen. From the sunlight, the tiger appeared to be on fire as the golden trees towered from above. I took the scenery all in. If she thinks this is cold, I'd hate to be around her during winter. He laughed. Yeah, lucky me, she says morning in October is cold.
It is cold, you so-called gentleman.
Miralise huffed as she walked down the castle steps. Why do you have vodka this early in the morning? I asked, noticing the bottle in his saddlebag. For Lilica, he said, taking the bottle out. She'll talk nonstop, but 3 shots and there's a disconnect between her mouth and her brain box and she shuts up.
Does she really talk that much?
Miralise asked as she mounted her horse in one fluent and graceful motion. I explained to Miralise that Lilica was typically a shy person at first, but that she'd eventually open up over time. I wanted Miralise to know that once anyone got to know Lilica, she could be a very friendly person. Lilica did, however, have a problem with over-talking in nervous situations. Everyone ready? Vlad said as he came storming down the stairs.
Where's Lily?
Miralise asked. Lilica, Vlad corrected her. She's going to sail back on Queen Koschei's boat. We were due to join her, but Miralise was against it, he added as he took the bottle from Casper.
Is it early?
Miralise asked. Yes, but I'm dealing with wings and a dingus here, he answered as pointed at Casper and me. The other elf silently joined us. Ready, Wings? Casper asked. Sure thing, dingus, I replied as I spurred my horse on. Vlad just shook his head. Miralise kept pace alongside as we made our way through Gilezo.
Why do the buildings have ramps?
She asked. For wheelchairs.
For what?
She asked. I pointed to a man being pushed up a ramp into a shop. Why is the elf here? I asked.
He is a guard.
Miralise replied. We have guards here.
I'd rather not say anymore. He left after our wedding.
She looked away. Here, Casper said as he tossed the bottle.
What?
Miralise asked. Celebrate, he answered as she took the bottle from me.
It looked like water.
She said as she pulled out the cork. Just don't drink it. I started, but it was too late. She spat out a mouthful of vodka.
Water. Water, give me water.
She demanded. We rode out of the capital city leading to the Arden Pass and its famed wall. Vlad grew more and more tense with every inch we drew closer to it. Vlad and my father never said anything about the Battle of the Arden Pass, and my mother only told me a few details about it. Slowly, the wall came into view through the fog as we made our way down the mountain.
What is that?
She asked. Something I wish the Queen would tear down. Vlad grunted. It's a reminder for the war between the Prussians and the Serbs, Casper said in a hushed tone.
Neville has told me of the war.
Miralise said. The Queen wants it to stand as a memorial, I replied. Casper slowed his horse. Can you feel it?
What?
Miralise and I asked. Dad's presence, he said. You're talking about him like he's dead, I replied as we made our way through the field leading to the wall. I looked to Miralise and said, Not many people like to talk about the war. She replied,
It is understandable. How long until we reach the Cordovan capital of Marang?
I knew she was getting impatient already. We'll get there tomorrow, I replied. That answer excited her because she clearly thought we would have to camp and had her hopes dashed when Casper told her about the inns lining the roads to Cordova as we passed under the wall.
That's better, come to think about it. I forgot about the cold weather.
Miralise said. I don't hear him complaining about the cold, I said as I pointed to the other elf. You two already sound like a married couple. Vlad chuckled. Just remember what Dad always says. Casper sighed. Vlad cleared his throat, trying not to laugh.
And what did Dad always say?
Miralise asked. When you're arguing with a woman or an elf, you're fighting a losing battle. I sighed. What about when you're arguing with an elf woman? Casper asked mockingly. You might as well just take her side, I replied.
At least someone warned you.
She said. Vlad looked over his shoulder and it seemed like everyone except me began to laugh. Even Miralise's guard joined in. We rode through the tiger and Miralise was looking from side to side. I noticed her observing the treetops and taking in the forest of her new home. She suddenly frowned as if something upset her. What is it? I asked as I looked up at the treetops swaying in the breeze under a few gray clouds. Looks like we might get a storm, Vlad said. We should get to a village before the rain starts, I said to Miralise, trying to calm her.
Hopefully it will just pass.
She mumbled. I thought I should say something to take her mind off the incoming storm. So, you like the tiger?
Yes, I wish I had arrived in the spring though.
She replied. It is beautiful during the spring, but I like it in the winter, I shared.
Is that a joke?
She asked as she rolled her eyes. No, when everything is covered with ice, it makes it look like the entire forest is made of glass, I said and smiled at her. She smiled back and shook her head. I removed a piece of seasoned beef from my saddlebag and offered her a piece.
More of what you sailors call field rations.
She sighed. Casper made the suggestion over his shoulder. If you don't like it, go ahead and boil your belt. You can eat that over this seasoned delicious beef. As we passed a signpost, Miralise casually grabbed an apple a traveler had left behind. She smiled brightly as she drew her arm back and threw it at Casper. There was a thump as the apple bounced off the back of his head. Enraged, he whipped around in his saddle. Miralise was grinning at him. You really don't like him, do you? I asked.
I would not put it like that, but I was relieved when my mother told me the name of my husband and it was not Casper.
She laughed.
Have you ever been off your island?
She asked. No, I heard that they found lands to the north, I responded. I would like to go see, but we're preoccupied with the empire to the south on your continent. We began talking about exploring, and she seemed to be more interested in exploration than I was. I'm sure Medved is looking forward to doing some exploring. Casper chuckled. Shut up! Vlad barked as Miralise gave me a curious look. I turned to the forest on my other side, hiding my embarrassment. I looked up and saw more storm clouds moving in. I glanced over to Miralise. I could tell she was struggling at avoiding the sky. I took a pine cone from a tree and tossed it at her. A moment later, I was struck by something sharp. I looked at her and she was holding a fierce leather whip, her fingers gripped tightly around the end of it. I wasn't sure if she had just found this or if it was something she carried with her that I wasn't aware of. A pine cone hit her on the back of her head, and we both looked as her guard grabbed another. The trip is going to be fun, I sighed.